Questions, a pause, smile gently, speak slowly. Let me start with a simple question. Have you ever tried to explain your pain to someone and instead of feeling lighter, you felt more tired? Questions. You spoke, you justified, you clarified, and still nothing changed. Sometimes the problem is not lack of words. Sometimes the problem is too many words. Because, my dear friends, questions. There are wounds that conversation cannot cure, but distance can. We are taught one thing in life: if there is a problem, talk it out. And yes, communication is powerful. Questions. But let me say something honestly and gently. Not every problem needs a conversation. Some problems need a pause. Distance is not punishment. Distance is medicine. Just like when a bone fractures, questions, the doctor doesn't say, keep using it and talking to it, but he says, rest it. Distance is rest for the heart. Questions. Many people misunderstand distance. The moment you step back, the world is quick to label you selfish, cold, egoistic, or weak. Why didn't you speak? They ask. Questions. Why didn't you fight for it? But what they don't see is that sometimes walking away is not running from the problem. Sometimes it is running toward your own peace. In daily life, questions, we are taught a very dangerous idea that being emotionally available all the time is a virtue. That if someone is upset, we must explain. If someone misunderstands us, we must convince them. Questions. If someone hurts us, we must immediately resolve it. Slowly, without realizing it, we start believing that our job is to absorb everyone else's emotions, even at the cost of our own mental health. Questions. Think about a simple daily example. Imagine you come home after a long, exhausting day. Your mind is tired, your heart is heavy, and all you want is silence. But instead of rest, questions, you are pulled into an argument. Someone's tone, someone's complaint, someone's unresolved frustration. You try to explain yourself calmly, but the other person is not listening. Questions. Your words fall into a void. You speak more, your voice rises, your energy drains, and by the end of it, you feel completely empty. Now ask yourself honestly, did that conversation heal you? Questions. Or did it break you a little more? This is where distance becomes emotional self-care. Distance is that moment when you decide, questions, I will not continue this conversation right now because I am not okay. It is not about ignoring the other person. It is about not abandoning yourself. Questions. Just like we take rest when the body is tired, the heart also needs rest. And distance is rest for the heart. Look at how we treat our phones. When the battery is low, questions, we don't keep using it and shouting at it for dying. We quietly put it on charge. But when our emotional battery is low, we do the opposite. We keep giving, explaining, adjusting, questions, and sacrificing until there is nothing left inside us. Distance is simply plugging yourself back into your own power. Many people stay in emotionally draining situations because they fear guilt. Questions? They fear being seen as rude. They fear losing relationships. But what they don't realize is that constant emotional overexposure creates resentment. Questions. And resentment is far more dangerous than distance. Distance heals quietly, resentment poisons slowly. Think about that one person in your life who only calls when they need something. Questions. Every time you see their name on your phone, your heart sinks a little. You pick up not out of joy, but out of obligation. You listen, you help, you support again and again. But when you need them, questions, they are busy, unavailable, or uninterested. Over time, something changes inside you. You are still there physically, but emotionally you feel used. Questions. Now tell me, wouldn't a little distance here be kinder to your soul than forced availability? Distance teaches you to respond instead of react. When you step back, emotions settle. Questions. Thoughts become clearer. You stop speaking from pain and start understanding your own needs. You begin to ask important questions. Why does this situation disturb me so much? Why do I feel unheard? Questions. Why am I constantly tired around certain people? These answers never come in the heat of arguments. They come in silence. There is also a beautiful daily life truth we often ignore. Questions. People value things they don't have easy access to. When you are always available, always adjusting, always forgiving, your presence becomes taken for granted. Distance is not about creating fear. Questions. It is about restoring balance. It reminds others and yourself that your time, energy, and emotions are precious. A mother knows this intuitively. When a child falls and gets hurt, questions. She doesn't keep shaking the wound and asking questions. She cleans it, applies medicine, and gives it time. Emotional wounds work the same way. If you keep poking them with arguments, explanations, questions, and justifications, they never heal. Distance is the medicine that allows the wound to close. Most importantly, distance helps you reconnect with yourself. When you step away from emotional chaos, questions, you start hearing your own inner voice again. The voice that says, questions, you deserve respect, you deserve peace, and you don't have to earn love by suffering. That voice is often drowned out by noise, guilt, and expectations. Questions. Distance gives it space to speak. So remember this: choosing distance does not mean you don't care. It means you care enough to protect your emotional health. Questions. It means you understand that peace is not found in winning arguments, but in choosing yourself when the cost of staying is too high. Distance is not the end of love. Many times, questions, it is the beginning of healing. Questions. One of the hardest truths to accept in life is this: not every conversation is meant to heal. We grow up believing that if we just find the right words, speak calmly, and explain ourselves properly, questions, everything will fall into place. But real life teaches us something far more painful. When ego enters a conversation, understanding quietly walks out. At that point, words don't build bridges. Questions, they become walls. Think about a very common daily life situation. Two people are arguing, maybe partners, siblings, friends, or even colleagues. Questions. The issue at the start is usually small missed call, a forgotten task, a misunderstood tone. But within minutes, the argument is no longer about the problem. Questions. It becomes about who is right and who is wrong. Voices rise, sentences begin with you always and you never. And suddenly the goal is not resolution. The goal is victory. Questions. That is ego speaking. When ego takes control, listening stops. The other person may still hear your words, but they are not listening to understand. They are listening to reply. Questions. Every sentence you speak is measured, judged, twisted, or stored as ammunition for the next attack. In such moments, even the most sincere explanation sounds like an excuse. Questions. And even the most loving words sound like manipulation. That is why words fail. Not because they are wrong, but because ego has closed the door to understanding. We see this everywhere in daily life. Questions. A parent tries to advise an adult child, but the child hears control instead of concern. A spouse tries to express hurt, but the partner hears blame instead of pain. A friend tries to set a boundary. Questions. But the other hears rejection instead of self-respect. In all these situations, the heart is speaking, but ego is interpreting. And ego always interprets in a way that protects itself. Questions. Not the relationship. Ego is very subtle. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It hides behind pride, self-respect, and I know what I'm doing. It whispers questions. Why should I bend first? Why should I apologize? If I accept their point, I will lose. And once these thoughts take over, conversations turn into competitions. Questions. The relationship becomes a battlefield where both sides lose, but ego feels temporarily satisfied. Think about how difficult it is to say a simple sentence. Questions. Maybe I was wrong. Not because it is untrue, but because ego makes it feel like defeat. Yet the irony is that relationships don't survive on winning arguments. Questions. They survive on mutual understanding. And understanding requires humility. The one thing ego refuses to practice. There is a beautiful daily example we often overlook. When a child is crying, questions, you don't argue logically with them. You don't say, your emotions are irrational. You lower yourself to their level, listen, and comfort them. Why does that work? Questions. Because there is no ego involved. The moment ego enters, compassion exits. Many people keep repeating the same conversations again and again, hoping that one day their words will finally land. Questions. But what they don't realize is that you cannot plant seeds in soil that has turned into stone. Ego hardens the heart. Until that hardness softens, no amount of explanation will work. Questions. That is why silence and space sometimes communicate more than 1,000 sentences. They remove you from the ego battlefield. Another daily life truth. When someone truly wants to understand you, questions, they don't need perfect words. Even broken sentences, pauses, and emotions are enough. But when someone is driven by ego, even your clearest explanation will be misunderstood. Questions. That is not a communication problem, it is an intention problem. Ego also blinds us to our own mistakes. It convinces us that if the other person is heard, questions, they are too sensitive. If they pull away, they are immature. If they stop explaining, they are arrogant. Ego always finds a way to protect its image. Questions, even at the cost of the relationship. And in doing so, it slowly destroys the very connection it is trying to dominate. This is why some conversations leave you more exhausted than before. Questions, you walk away thinking, why did I even try? It is not because you lacked patience or love. It is because you were trying to reach a heart that was guarded by ego. And ego does not want peace. Questions, it wants control. Understanding begins only when ego steps aside. When both people stop trying to prove a point and start trying to understand pain. Questions, when the need to be right becomes less important than the desire to stay connected. Until then, words will continue to fail, no matter how beautifully they are spoken. Questions. So the next time you find yourself repeating the same explanation, raising your voice, or feeling unheard, pause and ask yourself one honest question. Questions. Am I talking to a heart that wants to understand or an ego that wants to win? That awareness alone can save you from many unnecessary battles. Because sometimes, questions, the wisest response is not better words, but knowing when words no longer have a place. Questions. There is a simple truth we often learn very late in life. When you are too close to something, you cannot see it clearly. Whether it is a painting, a problem, or a person, closeness blurs vision. Questions. Distance does not reduce importance, it improves understanding. And this applies beautifully to our daily lives, especially to relationships and emotions. Think about a very ordinary experience. Questions. When your phone screen is too close to your eyes, everything looks big, overwhelming, and uncomfortable. Your head starts etching, your eyes strain, and clarity disappears. Questions. But the moment you move it a little farther away, things come back into focus. The content didn't change. Only the distance did. Emotional closeness works the same way. Questions. When you are deeply involved in a situation, emotions dominate logic. You react instantly, speak impulsively, and feel intensely. Small issues feel huge. Minor misunderstandings feel like betrayals. Questions. A delayed reply feels like rejection. This is not because the situation is actually that big, but because emotional closeness magnifies everything. Questions. Distance reduces that magnification and brings balance back. In daily life, we see this clearly in family relationships. Questions. When you live very close to someone, physically or emotionally, small habits start irritating you. The way they talk, the way they react, the way they don't meet your expectations. Questions. But when you step away for a few days, suddenly those same habits don't seem so unbearable. You start remembering the good moments, the laughter, the care. Distance didn't change the person. Questions. It changed your perspective. Closeness often traps us in reaction mode. Distance moves us into reflection mode. When you step back, you start asking better questions instead of giving instant answers. Questions. Is this really worth my energy? Am I hurt or am I just expecting too much? Is this about them? Questions. Or is this about my unresolved emotions? These questions rarely arise in the heat of closeness. They arise in the calm of distance. Consider a common workplace example. Questions. When you are stuck in a toxic environment every day, you start believing that stress, disrespect, and constant pressure are normal. You normalize exhaustion. But when you take a break, a holiday, questions, a leave, or even a quiet weekend, you suddenly realize how heavy it actually was. Distance reveals what closeness forced you to tolerate. The same applies to relationships. Questions. When you are always present, always adjusting, always compromising, you lose the ability to judge whether a relationship is balanced. Distance shows you patterns. Questions. You notice who checks on you and who doesn't, who respects your space, and who only values your presence when it benefits them. These realizations don't come from confrontation. Questions. They come from observation. And observation needs distance. Distance also helps you see yourself more clearly. When you are constantly trying to please others, you forget who you are without them. Questions. Stepping back allows you to reconnect with your own thoughts, your own routines, your own peace. You start remembering what makes you happy, what drains you, questions, and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. That clarity is powerful. It helps you return to relationships with awareness, not dependency. There is another beautiful daily life example. Questions. When you cook food, you don't keep tasting it every second. You step back, let it cook, and then taste it again. If you interfere constantly, the dish gets ruined. Relationships, too. Questions. Need space to develop naturally. Constant closeness can suffocate growth, while distance allows emotions to settle and mature. Distance also protects us from impulsive decisions. Questions. Many regrets are born out of emotional closeness. Words spoken in anger, messages sent in frustration, actions taken in hurt. When you take distance, you give emotions time to cool down. Questions. What felt urgent suddenly feels manageable. What felt unbearable suddenly feels understandable. Distance replaces impulse with wisdom. People often fear that distance will weaken bonds. But in reality, questions. Healthy distance strengthens them. It helps you appreciate what truly matters and let go of what doesn't. It separates attachment from connection. Attachment needs constant closeness. Questions. Connection survives and even deepens with space. Think about how we miss people when they are away. Absence sharpens appreciation. You begin to value the small things. Their voice, their presence, questions, their effort. Distance filters emotions. It removes noise and leaves behind what is real. Most importantly, distance gives you the courage to choose consciously. Instead of staying out of habit, fear, questions, or obligation, you return, if you choose to, with clarity and intention. And if you don't return, you leave with understanding instead of bitterness. So remember, questions. Distance is not about escaping reality. It is about seeing reality clearly. It is the pause that allows you to step back, observe, and understand the full picture. Sometimes, questions. The answers you are desperately looking for don't appear in conversations, arguments, or explanations. They appear quietly when you give yourself enough space to see life as it truly is. Questions. In a world full of noise, explanations, and constant talking, silence is often misunderstood. People assume that if you are silent, you are weak, scared, or defeated. But in reality, questions. Silence is one of the strongest forms of communication, especially when it comes to boundaries. Arguments try to convince, silence simply declares. Questions. And that declaration is often far more powerful than 1,000 words. Think about how arguments usually go in daily life. You try to explain your limits politely. You say, questions. I'm not comfortable with this, or this hurts me. The other person listens halfway, interrupts, defends themselves, and turns the conversation around. Soon, questions. You are no longer talking about your boundary. You are defending your feelings. The discussion becomes heated, emotions rise, and by the end of it, you feel exhausted and unheard. In such moments, questions. Arguments don't protect your boundaries, they slowly erode them. Silence, on the other hand, does not invite debate. When you stop engaging in a pattern that disrespects you, questions. You send a clear message without raising your voice. You are not asking for permission to be treated better. You are choosing not to participate in what hurts you. Questions. That choice speaks louder than any argument ever could. Look at a simple daily example. Suppose someone repeatedly makes jokes at your expense. The first few times you laugh it off. Questions. Then you explain calmly that it bothers you. They brush it aside and say, "You're too sensitive." If you keep arguing, you end up justifying your pain. But the day you stop laughing, questions, stop responding, and quietly remove yourself from that situation, something shifts. Your silence forces awareness. It says, "This is not acceptable anymore," without a single confrontation. Questions. Silence is not about punishment. It is about self-respect. It is the moment you decide that you will no longer explain your worth to someone who benefits from ignoring it. Questions. Boundaries don't always need speeches. Sometimes they need consistency, and silence creates that consistency. In relationships, this becomes even more important. Questions. Many people over-explain because they fear being misunderstood. They keep talking, clarifying, and adjusting, hoping the other person will finally understand their limits. Questions. But when someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, the problem is not lack of explanation. It is lack of respect. And respect is not taught through arguments. It is learned through consequences. Questions. Silence is often that consequence. Consider a workplace scenario. A colleague keeps interrupting you, dismissing your ideas, or taking credit for your work. You confront them verbally again and again. Questions. But nothing changes. One day you stop engaging unnecessarily. You keep conversations professional, limit access, and let your actions reflect your standards. Gradually the dynamic shifts. Questions. Not because you argued better, but because your silence redefined the relationship. Silence also protects your energy. Arguments drain you emotionally and mentally. Questions. They pull you into cycles where you feel the need to prove your intentions and defend your feelings. Silence steps you out of that cycle. Questions. It keeps your peace intact while still communicating your limits. There is a deep wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to stop. Silence is not absence of communication. Questions. It is intentional communication. It tells others that certain behaviors no longer deserve your response. And that realization often hits harder than words. Questions. We also need to understand that people observe behavior more than they listen to speeches. You can argue all day about how you want to be treated, but if you keep tolerating disrespect, questions, your words lose meaning. Silence aligned with action restores that meaning. It shows that your boundaries are not emotional reactions. They are values you live by. In daily life, questions, parents use this wisely. When a child throws a tantrum, constant scolding often makes it worse. Calm silence, followed by firm action, teaches the lesson far more effectively. Questions. The child understands that certain behaviors don't get attention. Similarly, in adult relationships, silence teaches what arguments cannot. Silence also gives others space to reflect. Questions. When you stop explaining and just step back, the other person is left with their own thoughts. There is no argument to fight, no words to twist, just absence. And in that absence, questions. Many people finally understand what they were taking for granted. Most importantly, silence helps you stay aligned with yourself. It keeps you from saying things you might regret later. Questions. It allows emotions to settle and wisdom to rise. You don't lose your dignity in the heat of the moment. Instead, you protect it quietly. So remember this questions. Boundaries are not built loud declarations alone. They are built by calm decisions repeated consistently. Silence is one of those decisions. It is not weakness. It is clarity. Questions. And when used with self-respect, silence communicates more powerfully than the longest argument ever could. Questions. Most of us believe healing happens when everything is explained, discussed, and resolved immediately. We think clarity comes from constant talking, analyzing questions, and revisiting the same emotions again and again. But in reality, healing begins not when answers appear. Healing begins when noise disappears. Questions. Emotional noise is one of the biggest barriers to inner peace, and we live surrounded by it every single day. Think about your daily life. From the moment you wake up, your mind is already busy. Questions. Notifications, messages, expectations, unfinished conversations, old memories, future worries, everything speaks at once. Add to that emotional noise or arguments replaying in your head. Questions. Things you wish you had said, things someone else said that hurt you, fear of being misunderstood, pressure to respond. In this chaos, where is the space for healing? Questions. Imagine trying to hear a soft melody in a crowded market. No matter how beautiful the music is, you won't hear it clearly unless the surrounding noise reduces. Healing is that soft melody. Questions. It does not shout, it whispers. And it can only be heard when emotional noise settles. In daily life, we often notice this after a long argument. Immediately after the conflict, questions, emotions are loud, anger, hurt, disappointment, guilt. At that moment, even good advice feels irritating. But a few days later, when things become quieter, perspective changes. Questions. You suddenly understand what actually hurt you. You realize what was your responsibility and what wasn't. That clarity didn't come from the argument. It came from the silence that followed. Questions. Emotional noise is created when we overthink, over-explain, and over-attach. We keep replaying situations in our mind, hoping to rewrite the past. We imagine conversations that will never happen. Questions. We wait for apologies that may never come. All of this keeps the wound open. Noise keeps wounds alive. Silence allows them to close. Think of a physical injury. If you keep touching it, scratching it, questions, checking it every minute, it takes longer to heal. But if you clean it and leave it alone, the body does its work naturally. Emotional wounds work the same way. Constant discussion, justification, questions, and self-blame delay recovery. Reducing emotional noise is like applying medicine and allowing time to do its job. A very common daily life example is heartbreak or disappointment. Initially, questions. You want to talk about it to everyone. You replay the story again and again. Each retelling brings temporary relief, but also keeps you emotionally stuck in that moment. Over time, questions. Healing truly begins when you stop narrating the pain and start living beyond it. When the mind becomes quieter, the heart starts breathing again. Even in families, questions. Healing often comes after emotional noise reduces. When there is constant tension, criticism, or unresolved anger, everyone feels drained. Questions. But when people stop reacting to every comment and give each other space, the atmosphere slowly improves. Not because the problem magically disappeared, questions, but because the emotional volume lowered enough for understanding to emerge. Emotional noise also comes from external opinions. Too many people telling you what you should feel, what you should do, questions, how you should move on. Their intentions may be good, but their voices add confusion. Healing requires listening to yourself more than listening to the world. Questions. And you can only hear yourself when the noise fades. Reducing emotional noise doesn't mean suppressing feelings. It means choosing when and where to engage with them. Questions. It means not allowing every thought to demand your attention. It means understanding that some emotions need expression, but others need rest. Balance is the key. Questions. Notice how calm environments affect you. A quiet morning, a peaceful walk, a moment of stillness before sleep. In those moments, thoughts slow down. Breathing becomes deeper. Suddenly, questions. The same problems feel lighter. That is not because life changed overnight, but because emotional noise reduced enough for peace to enter. Healing is not dramatic. Questions. It does not arrive with loud realizations. It arrives gently when you stop fighting your emotions and allow them to settle. When you stop forcing closure and allow acceptance to grow. Questions. When you stop seeking validation and start giving yourself compassion. In daily life, we often mistake constant emotional engagement for strength. But true strength lies in knowing when to step back. Questions. When to stop responding, when to let silence do its work. Reducing emotional noise is not giving up, it is giving yourself a chance to recover. So remember this if you want healing. Questions. Don't chase answers immediately. First, create quiet. Step away from the chaos, the arguments, the mental loops. Let the noise fade. Because in that silence, your heart finds its rhythm again. Questions. And once the noise reduces, healing doesn't feel forced. It happens naturally.